The reason most people fail, quote unquote, the law of attraction is because they do manifesting methods and techniques with the expressed intent of getting a result, which most people say, well, of course, why else would I do it? Well, it's because when you're doing something with the intent of getting the result, you're actually screaming to the universal intelligence that you don't have what you want, thereby reinforcing it. Whereas if instead you did these methods with purely with the intent of just feeling good, you will counterintuitively and indirectly be accessing the frequency of what you want. Then you'd get the momentum, then you'd get the results.
Andrew, great to have you here, my friend. Thanks for joining with me on the High Voltage Business Builders podcast.
Neil, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here and where we're going to take this conversation.
Yeah, man. So you and I had some fun conversations that kind of went around the world and back in 80 seconds, I believe, when we had our first call. So we're probably going to ramp some topics around today, but I definitely want to cover what's valuable to you, of course. And obviously, interest in the audience has to do with anything from building to wealth to marketing to e-commerce and real estate and areas of building a lifestyle-driven business, and something I know that you appreciate from the conversation we had. So one of the things that I know you've been working on, and obviously you've done some really cool things around the books and law of attraction, which I think is something that the audience would very much get some interest. So what is it to you? What does law of attraction even mean to you?
Yeah, law of attraction for me is simply the premise that everything is energy. And this is, obviously, there's religious beliefs and people and go in a certain direction, but my perspective is everything is energy. Your energy, I'm energy. The microphone I'm speaking on is energy. And all energy vibrates at a certain frequency. And like frequencies tend to vibrate in resonance with other like frequencies, which is a long winded way of saying, to an extent, what you think about, you can produce in your life because you're actually vibrating it into your existence.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I know we covered a little bit about that when we talked, and there's some aspects, I think, of mainstream religions or ideologies, let's call it, to some degree, that subscribe to the idea that to push that boundary is to push yourself, when in actuality, if you are looking into the spiritual realm, and whether you're reading certain religions or Christianity or whatever, you'll find that there is ability, resonance, and frequencies are a huge component of a much greater aspect of energy. Tesla unlocked some of that in his frequencies, didn't he?
Yeah, and the funny thing about Tesla, he's I won't speak for you, but he was certainly way smarter than me. And the beauty of this, at least from this perspective, is I mean, Tesla, you're gonna create some amazing things if you've got his mind. You don't need his mind in order to create good in your life, in order to create positivity, abundance,
Right.
wealth, prosperity, happiness, fulfillment. All you have to do is focus on these things, and the universal intelligence will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, it's one of the things we try to resonate into our children, isn't it? I mean, it's the idea that if you speak good into the world and do good, good can return to you. If you experience misery loves company, and you like to throw things that are miserable into the world and constant negativity, you're going to attract other negativity to you. And that's a simple premise, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's funny because I never grew up very religious. I never said grace or anything like that, and I would see people say grace on TV, and it always seemed very routine to me. But after I learned about this, I understood why people express gratitude for their food. They're infusing positive energy into the substance that they're putting into their bodies. They're actually
Yeah.
making their bodies and the food healthier through that gratitude. It gave me a whole new perspective that I never got just by watching TV or anything like that. It really is the power of your thoughts, the power of your intentions, and really coming from a place of integrity and good, not trying to manipulate God or the universe or however you want to look at it, but more like
Yeah.
working in harmony in a way where you understand where you put out good and you think good and you intend good, and you are inviting and welcoming that back to you.
Yeah, it is truly an attraction methodology. I mean, if you think about it and you live it, it's not a natural occurrence that we naturally think positive about things, is it? Your experience probably lends better credibility to this than me, but what's your thoughts on that, man?
Well, this is where, and we're almost diving into a little bit what we were talking about the last time we had a conversation, because there's so much going on around us just in terms of society. There's societal programming. We look at the magazines and newspapers that they've seen that they make more money, they get more views, they get more clicks, they get more eyeballs when they're going down a negative road. Movies have to be dramatic, TV shows have to be dramatic. It's not very cost effective, at least it doesn't seem that way for people that are putting out a message to mass consciousness to have a positive spin versus a negative one. And because of that, we're
Yeah.
just, that's the programming that's going into our mind. That's the feedback. Even if we're aware of, like, you and I, we're smart guys, we're aware of this. And yet we still have to acknowledge that these messages are being broadcast into us through regular conversations, through anything on a very consistent, very never ending basis. And we need to understand that in order to make sure that we're not like falling into old patterns and falling into that negativity.
No, we don't. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I turn mainstream media off. You know, a lot of people say, well, it's there's other reasons and justifications. At the end of the day, when I watch a 30-minute segment on the news, whether it's local news or any other news, the constant repetitive negative topics and fear and negative and fear and death and fear and who died and who didn't. And then there's one little thing they throw in there about someone saved a kitty from a tree or whatever. And then it's literally like commercials for the other, 20 minutes of the 30 minutes that are there. I'm like, man, what a dirty, feeling you get after participating in that environment. I never acknowledged it that way. It's a low energy moment watching the news. That's basically what it gets down. I mean, any news. I decided to just turn it all off. I get my news sources from friends or connections or people that I trust now, because I typically want to not just live in a bubble of ignorance and sunshine and rainbows and unicorn farts, because there's not really how it works. But at the end of the day, I don't want to subscribe to the constant belittling negativity and just an irreconcilable issues that are fear mongering every freaking minute of the day. Drives me insane. In fact, I think it's one of the things that others who might not understand what you get and have accomplished in literally selling 100,000 copies of your book. But by the way, kudos to that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's not a small feat in any measure. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But that effort, knowledge, and ability for you to do that, as well as what you put into the world, will reciprocate positivity from people. And that obviously tells me you're somebody who doesn't subscribe to the things I just discussed.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I don't even get how some people get this level of awareness and some people don't, and I don't know if it's luck of the draw. Like I don't know if it's predestiny. I don't know if it's past lives and future lives. Like I don't even know how it happens. I'm just grateful that I came upon books and experiences and mentors and people that would shine a spotlight on this so that I could be aware as it was coming at me, and I could ideally do something a little more constructive with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the last law of attraction book you'll ever need to read is a very bold statement. How did you come to the confidence level and statement that you could put something out that well and feel that it was going to be received positively?
Yeah, it's interesting because I learned about, and I'll give the fast version of this. I learned about law of attraction in 2004, and I bumped all over the place for 4 years trying to figure things out, trying to figure out why would I learn about this, get excited, start to do it, start to get results, and then stop anyway. And I basically had to have this deep journey of self discovery till I finally sorted out. I hit a wall and I lost my girlfriend in business in 1 week, and I kind of was like forced myself in a positive way to strategically do methods for just 5 minutes a day. And it just clicked for me. So it took me 11 years before deciding to even write this book. And it was really just trying to do something interesting with my business so that I was fulfilled all day. And I had to give myself permission with this bold title because there's like 1,000 law of attraction books out there. If I can't bring something new to the conversation, if I can't give something new to the reader that they've never seen before, there's no point anyway. So it is a bold promise, but it was also like a bold challenge to myself to rise to the occasion and actually make it, hopefully, the last law of attraction book they would ever need to read, because I would get them over that last hump of why do they stop stopping? Why
Yeah.
do they keep stopping? And how could they stop stopping?
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things. I think that, you mentioned the frequency and the elevation, and like minds attract like minds. And you will typically see the connections, and even the connection that was made for us to have our first conversation is one in which people are reciprocating at that level of frequency. And I think when people feel like they can't break into that level, or they don't understand how to get where they're going, or they don't know how to do something to change their life, they're tired and not inspired. I think the thing they're missing is that connectivity to others that are at that frequency or higher in terms of their thinking, their life, their energy, and how they treat people, literally, and how they do life and business. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and they're also, not only are they not accessing that frequency with others, they're not accessing it within themselves. And to give away a little ninja trick for people here, if that anyone that kind of fiddled with law of attraction and think maybe, maybe not, think it's a scam because they tried it, it didn't work. The reason most people, fail, quote unquote, the law of attraction is because they do manifesting methods and techniques, with the expressed intent of getting a result, which most people say, well, of course, why else would I do it? Well, it's because when you're doing something with the intent of getting the result, you don't realize this, but you're actually screaming to the universal intelligence that you don't have what you want, thereby reinforcing it. Whereas if instead you did these methods with purely with the intent of just feeling good while thinking about what you have or what you want or both, you will counterintuitively and indirectly be accessing the frequency of what you want. Then you'd get the momentum, then you'd get the results, then you'd have the enthusiasm and the confidence to continue. It really is that simple.
Yeah, it actually is, and it really gets down to you changing your perception of reality, isn't it? I mean, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, you might have a reality that exists in your 9 to 5, your life, your business, your work, your issues with your wife, spouse, or significant other, your kid problems, or any other type of issues you're facing in life. You're just simply choosing to refocus those at the end of the day. You may be surrendering to the negativity, or you may be battling it, or you may be choosing not to surrender to the positive because of fear of rejection. Fear of rejection, I think, is one thing a lot of people get hung up on by sending positivity into the world. Or what happens if I say something positive and one person acts negative towards me? That's a personal confidence issue, right? It's a challenge. I had problems with that in the past when I dealt with a lot of personal issues and I had issues with marriage and things, and I got my confidence all screwed up in the world. I got my pride and arrogance all screwed up in the world. And one of the things that started to put me on the right path is I found a book by Susan Jeffries called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways.
Mm.
And the end question that was in that book that kept saying over and over and kept becoming a mantra in my brain of starting to turn around the energy and the positivity and out of this negativity because I was stuck in a really bad hole in a really bad place was, what's the worst that can happen? Like I just kept asking myself, what's the worst that can happen? Right. And the worst that can happen is not somebody telling you they don't like you on a comment on Facebook or they tell you to your face they don't like your person or whatever. That's not the worst thing that can happen. I know that rejection is there for a lot of people. It's why they don't like public speaking as the number one fear because they're afraid to get up there and say something that someone's not going to like. But the
Yes.
moment you get past that, it isn't that I don't care about the person who doesn't like what I'm saying or doesn't agree. It's that I care enough to keep saying the truth, even if it hurts their feelings.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that, like, speaking in front of people, there was this old, it was said so many times that certain people fear public speaking more than death. And I would argue they actually feared as much because it's technically the same thing. Because biologically speaking, we come from ancestors who, if you were rejected by the crowd, if you were kicked out of the tribe, then it was you on your own against the saber-toothed tiger, meaning to get
Right.
rejected by society actually meant death at a certain
That
point,
death.
and
Yeah.
biologically, we remember that.
Yeah. At this point, the worst case scenario is you can still go down to a Taco Bell and get food,
Yeah.
even if it's not the best food in the world. death,
Yeah, it's like
death is not the precipice at this point.
even like, when you're getting a lot of garbage on social media and people are hating on you,
Oh,
people are
yeah.
trying to cancel
Oh,
you,
yeah.
it's not the same as it was, like, if you got kicked out of the tribe and you had to fight the tiger on your own.
No, it's not the same, dude. It's not at all the same, right? I mean, and some of us don't have anywhere near the skills capable of going out and making raw material tools and defending ourselves. Most of us are just going to get eaten in a couple bites. That's the sad reality of it, right? But one
Yeah.
of the things about this that I appreciate about you is you give off a positive aura, which is impressive because not a lot of people do that. And I speak with a lot of people who are, wanting to change life or in their process or in the, going along and in their life and are trying to make things happen. And quite honestly, they always want to know what's the difference in what you're doing or how do you make people successful? Or, they always have these questions of confidence. And at the end of the line, what typically will see in those folks, and I think you understand this, is the ones that are the most positive when they reach me about life and business and opportunity, et cetera, are the ones that I know have the most success potential. The
Mm.
challenge is those other folks don't wanna hear that, and I've had people scream at me on calls and be, ruthlessly nasty, and call I know, "Woe is me, a poor guy," right? They get mad at me and hurt my feelings, but they're not a good place, life. They're not in a good place, they just don't resonate a good energy. How do you face that yourself? How would you give somebody some tips today to turn that around and start having them get into a position of attracting as opposed to rejecting people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, thank you for the compliment about the positive vibe. So the ninja trick, and we were skirting this issue a couple of minutes ago, where you were talking about changing your mindset. It
Yep.
goes deeper. It goes being willing to change your mindset, being willing to be wrong, being willing to look at the reality around you. Because, like, if what you thought was true isn't true all of a sudden, that could feel like a huge threat to your survival. It's an existential nightmare for people. You've got to be willing to say, you know what? The life that I want on the other end is going to make it worth it to me to have enough courage to look through this and say, you know what? Maybe my perception on reality isn't as accurate as I've been told it is. Maybe the thing that someone told me my whole life isn't actually true or isn't exactly the way they said it is. If people have that courage and are willing to be wrong and are willing then to see, not even saying, okay, I'm going from this to definitely that. Like, no, I'm going from this to trying this out and seeing if this is a better fit, to trying 30 days of having a more positive mentality, not because Tony Robbins or a guru told me to, but because the old way hasn't been working. So it's worth it to me just to experiment and see what happens. Having that
Why
willingness
not,
to be
right?
wrong, that's enough.
Right. Why not? Why not feel that fear and do it anyways? What is the worst that can happen if you take the entire day and turn every negative event into a positive spin? If you literally make the choice, and this is a change event, and you're right, changing mindset is easy to say. It's the actionable, accountable activities that you have to do that match that choice in your mind that will actually resonate an outcome. And sometimes this might take months, it may take 30 days, it may take 30 years. But the
Yes.
intent is to change and refocus anything that's coming at you negative into a positive, right?
Yeah, and
One of the ways that
there's a huge hurdle in our way that most people don't realize. And actually, this is what I talk about in the last Law of Attraction book you'll ever need to read. It's what I define as the ego, because ego is a loaded term psychologically. People have different definitions. My definition of the ego is that part of your mind that only cares about your survival. And the reason this is an issue is because anyone listening, whatever your money problems are, whatever your relationship problems, even whatever your health problems are right now, your ego is scanning the terrain, looking around the room and saying, my person is alive. So I do not want to risk the status quo by any change that they might be able to make, because that person might want to be rich or famous. But for all I know, when you're famous, you're going to get a bunch of stalkers. When you're rich, you're going to get family coming out of the woodwork to sue you for your home. So your ego actually loves you. It's a misguided attempt to protect you, but it will ruthlessly prey on your fears and uncertainties and doubts to keep you addicted to your struggle, because it knows you're alive right now and it does not know the probability of your survival if you change even in a positive way. Which is why when you move forward in these things and you try to be positive, you've got to be willing to accept that you're not going to be good at it all the time. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall down. You're going to doubt yourself. That part's okay so long as you follow through on the path to the best of your ability
yeah.
and be patient and kind with yourself.
Dude, well said. It's that confidence in your ability to look past objections, be a go-getter, overcome challenges, adapt and shift in changes. That's something that I give God the credit for his building into me as a person to overcome those challenges. But ego and pride were one of my big fail points in the past, and I've wrecked things and destroyed things and created negativity and built situations that literally heaped coals upon my head because I was doing bad things in the world and reciprocating bad things back to me. And if I kept going, commiseration with more bad people would have just led to more bad things because I was
Mhm.
drawing that energy in around me, like you just said, and I was pulling those people towards me. If people are listening to this today, you may not be aware of who Andrew Cap is, but he has written this book called The Last Law of Attraction you'll ever need to read. You guys are going to want to check this out. It's a bestseller on Amazon. He sold over 100,000 copies, guys. So if you're listening to him today and you're wondering where he's getting this experience from, understand as a marketer, an innovator, and a writer, he's got some significant background. He's got a new book out too, right? 3 words I used to write 100,000 to sell
The three
100,000
words I
books.
used to
Excuse
sell
me.
100,000 books, and thank you for the compliment.
3 words I used to sell 100,000.
Yeah, and as the title kind of implies, it's basically I had a situation where people sent from a marketing standpoint, I would, report like, "Oh, the book sold 40,000 copies now," because I know strategically if someone sees it sold 40,000, they might give it a shot. Okay, let me report when it sold 50,000, 70,000, and on and on. And I had a bunch of people coming to me saying, "Hey, Andrew, how are you selling all these books?" And PS, the 3 words in the book are not law of attraction, even though obviously I have a viewpoint that law of attraction governs pretty much most everything. But they kept asking me, like, how'd you do this? And I kept getting on phone calls with people and explaining my mostly organic marketing process, and got to a point where
Mhm.
like all these people are asking me, I don't want to charge my friends. I don't want to say no to them. Why don't I just write this book? Why don't I just, next time someone asks me, I'm like, listen, this thing's $4 on Kindle. Read this. And if you still have questions, come to me, but this will answer everything. And that was really the
Yeah.
purpose of the book to serve those people that couldn't figure out, but wanted to figure out how to sell so many books.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I mean, as you look into that and you understand the marketing and the capabilities behind that, you gotta have a good message, you gotta resonate with somebody, and clearly you walk into something that's of, a major I wouldn't say a concern, but a major desire of people today to, attract versus repel. And since we're in a very diversified situation now and we're being propagandized to every day, so diversity seems like a daily attempt literally to divide us on every possible stupid thing you can think of or things they can think of to try to create divide. When your people are listening to this today, by the time this podcast is out and you're listening to it now, who knows what other type of division they may have thrown at us in the next 30, 45 days before we get this out. But this is one of the things you and I were rapping on the other day, and we could probably go on for 2 hours about this topic because so much negativity is being pumped into our minds and our heart through social media and our cell phones and all kinds of connections, even family members and stuff. We've gone through some major divides in the last 2, 3 years that have created segments, at least in my own family, where folks don't really want to talk to me about certain things or they don't like certain topics or suddenly my healthcare choices offend them. And wow, isn't that an interesting thing to divide people on? Personal healthcare choices, right? I mean, what an interesting topic to go in and divide folks. As you're thinking forward in the next year and you're working on things, where do you go with this? Where are you going to take this? Where are you headed next? What's on your agenda?
So it's interesting because, you know, what you're speaking to, it goes deep. It really does. And I've by the way, as I've gotten to know you, I've observed you and I'm like, I'm so impressed by your ability to articulate certain things in so few words. And there's things that I'm good at articulating and things I'm not so good at articulating. Right now, where I see my mission, and this may evolve a month from now, a year from now, a day from now, I kind of see like, through the law of attraction book for the most part and through my work, I'm just trying to break up that scar tissue, that ego scar tissue, that emotional scar tissue in people and shake them around a little just so that they can begin to accept the possibility that things being presented to them in a certain fashion, regardless of what aspect of life we're talking about, these things don't necessarily have to be the truth. They aren't necessarily the truth.
Yeah.
I think it's just very important
Right.
for people to understand that they will have a fixed attachment to a level of their political views or their spiritual views or whatever it might be. And I said, don't throw your views away and willy nilly. I've never used that term before. I feel old fashioned now. Don't throw those words away, but by the same token, don't just assume you know everything. Don't just assume that
Yeah.
you have the answer
Yeah.
because if you're really divided with people and you're refusing to speak to someone, that might be an indicator that you're a little more rigid than you want to admit to yourself. And it might be an indicator that you want to try to see. If you don't want to agree with someone, fine. But if you don't understand their point of view, why they really believe something, then that means you've closed yourself off to a manipulation for yourself. I'm using through the lens of law of attraction and through the lens, I guess, of 3 words. I used to sell 100,000 books, more just giving people psychological insights, just giving people the opportunity to hopefully be able to re-examine their views, not on on a every so often basis, but even on a daily basis. Being willing to say this thing that I discovered a month ago that I'm really into, maybe that's not it. But I have to be patient enough with myself and not drive myself crazy, not go insane with all these possibilities. I still have to be resolute in knowing it's okay if I don't have all the answers yet.
Yeah, thank you for those kind words, man. And that's a very smart way to say in humility, I think is the word there to be able to humble yourself to someone else. There are certain aspects though that don't you feel like there are certain conversations, topics, people, even mindsets right now that we're dealing with where humility is not possible. Conversations of certain resonance are not possible. People simply won't be open to any objective thoughts or opinions.
Yeah, it's funny because like when I wrote the last Law of Attraction book you're on to read, I never had this intent, but this is one of the things that I write about with the ego. Because when you think about it, that refusal of humility, that refusal to even be willing to have another conversation, it's rooted in the person saying, well, no, the way my political views or the way my views on life or on health or whatever, I'm alive all this time. I'm not going to change that. So I personally believe that a lack of humility is coming from a fear of like a fear and a need for survival. And the one thing I haven't sorted out yet is how to get people. And by the way, I've always got to work on this myself every day, so I'm not above anyone here. But how do I get
Mm.
people to be more courageous and be more willing to let go of that ego and let go of that pride, not
Yeah.
because they're supposed to and not because they owe it to anyone else, but because it is strategically advantageous for them to have more information, more knowledge, and more self awareness on the table for themselves in every passing day to enhance their ability to enjoy life, to thrive in life, to succeed in life, and to move forward in a healthier, happier way.
Yeah, it sort of comes down to base instincts. I mean, we talked a little bit about that a minute ago in terms of your belief that this fear and this feeling of being ostracized from society literally turns you into somebody who's outside of the caste system, and now you're literally a saber tooth tiger, a meal. You're an appetizer. The aspect of that also roots itself in the fight or flight method, doesn't it? Or the fight or flight belief that instinctually people tend to have a base. They don't necessarily always know it because they've not always been challenged
Mm,
on a certain situation or challenged in life to the point where at some point they're going to figure that out. They're going to be challenged by somebody bigger or faster or stronger or more powerful or more rich or whatever. And the fight or flight instinct is going to kick in. And it seems that there's almost a nuance between there now. There's because that seems like both ends of the spectrum. You're either going to fight somebody or you're going to run away. At this point, there's almost the passive aggressive situation happening in the gray area between that, right? Where it is, I'm not necessarily going to fight or flight, but I'm going to go behind your back and stab you about 100 times on social media or wherever else and act a keyboard warrior. But if I was to meet you face to face and have this conversation, I would probably run away. It's such
yeah.
an interesting cultural thing we're watching, isn't it?
The most challenging thing, well, this sounds dramatic. It just came to mind. Maybe it's not the most dramatic thing, but one of the most challenging things in the world to me is nuance, because you're just describing nuance there, fight or flight, but sometimes, or but only in this way. And you're
That's
100%
right.
right. And it's so hard. It's mentally and emotionally and spiritually and physically draining to navigate these nuances, which is why oftentimes people hold so tightly to a situation, why they will be passive aggressive because it's a default. I hope people get self-awareness on this. And I have to remind myself, we are in
Yeah.
constant survival and energetic preservation mode when we react to something in a certain way, kind of like by default, or knee-jerk reaction. That's really us reacting in a quick way because we've determined either subconsciously or consciously that that's the best use of our energy versus the extra energy that it might take to compose ourselves and have something that would technically better for us in the long term.
Yeah, no, well said. And there's so many different points to argue about the intricacies of that, whether it's, I'm fight or flight in terms of aspects of my life, my business, my personal, my relationships, or situations that are happening to me that I can or cannot control, or situations I created that I now have to deal with. I don't know if it's monetary issues or maybe it's unfair that they're giving people, money for their student loans, but I just paid my student loan off. I mean, this is going to create situations of negativity that are going to push you into that nuance. It really is because there's not a lot of area that you can control some of this. This is the conversation I was having with my wife earlier, and she's just like, I'm not going to focus on some of that stuff because at the end of the day, how much of that can I control?
Hmm.
And was very well said. How much can I control of certain aspects? And just one example at the time we're doing this podcast is that, they've announced they're going to be giving out 20K or up to 20K in, free money to pay back student loans. And there's a lot of scuttlebutt, and I kind of weighed in on my opinion probably a little too soon about this yesterday and probably should have held back a little bit. But again, I'm the guy who instinctually fights. I'm not a flight person. So I typically run towards the problem, even if I don't understand what it is yet. But it does have that nuance of, you know, the idea that I'm self providing or self persevering through my situations and overcame those objections and paid the money, did the work. Maybe I got the degree or didn't get the degree in this instance. And I'm feeling very proud of myself because I paid that off. Or maybe it's the dad who's proud of because he paid off the girl's education or son's education and now they have no debt. And that's a wonderful, amazing gift that he spent 20, 30 years doing for them. You can understand how some of these nuances are super intercomplex, right? And just create situations of just anger and stuff without anywhere to unleash it.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about it is there's so many, like, a lot of people there, and I know this isn't just you, but a lot of people are only on the level of, "Is this right or not right?" But it goes deeper because regardless of whether it is right or not right, if this does happen, well, what are the actual impacts of it? And have people that both agreed and disagreed with it, have they actually thought what that impact makes or what it means? in terms of economy, in terms of public perception, in terms of polls and politics and politicians and elections, in terms of food supply. I'm not even going to tell you, and I'm not the best person to speak on this anyway, but has anyone actually thought about, does this affect food supply in some way, shape, or form? Now, maybe it doesn't, but if you haven't even asked that question, given everything going on in the world, to me, it
Yeah.
indicates that someone not asking that question isn't really thinking on this on a deep enough level. And your wife is right. Like if there's nothing you can do about it, why think about it? And that's where more nuance gets in because like I have no control over it, but I also have to think about it. Well, does this mean that I have to do something different with stocks or investing? Does this mean I have to
That's
do
right.
something regionally
Yeah.
or geographically? Does this mean I have to make other decisions in my life to protect against an assumption of what kind of impact this might have on society, even, just in terms of this country or globally?
And that's where that ambiguity creates stress and
Yes.
concern, and that is ambiguity, right? I mean, we're ending up in situations between life and business and decisions all the time where sometimes we feel like a post turtle who's just hanging out, wondering, well, now what? Like, where do I go? Is this the right decision? Not the right decision? Because so much is swirling. It's very difficult at times to make those next step educated decisions, and I think this is where camaraderie and level and ascension of understanding as well as energy is getting to positions to have these kinds of conversations with people to get them to elevate above that, right? It's something that I was talking about yesterday in terms of understanding that literally the poor and the working class work for money. And the difference between working for money versus working for purpose is actually going to raise and elevate your money, your status, your connections, and your networking. And that's a very difficult thing to break through when there is this ambiguity of finances and money and providing and investing and dealing and what happens next. And if I put money into, should I put money into education? If I'm just going to be, if it's going to be given to somebody else, do I invest it somewhere else? Do I get a mentor? Do I start a business or don't start a business right now? It creates a lot of ambiguity in decision making.
Hmm. Yeah. The toughest challenge is for people to acknowledge that and be angry about it and yet still be willing to move forward and do whatever they can with as much information as they have. I remember when the pandemic began, I guess it was January, February 2020. There was all
Yeah.
like I go into all these different corners of the internet and learn stuff and see people their theories. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But there was a lot of people kind of like, chattering like there's gonna be this huge financial global reset in April of 2020. They were convinced and they were convincing. Now, if I had listened to them and like, well, why should I even run my business? I would have been nowhere. Instead, I'm like, well, this sounds convincing, but what if they're wrong? Why don't I keep doing what I've been doing as if I've been doing it, as if this is not going to be right, and move forward in my business? And because I stayed on point, even as I'm observing all these conflicting viewpoints saying that something's going to be a certain way, that's why I was able to sell 100,000 plus copies of my book because I never put all my stock in some kind of prediction and just left it at that. I kept moving forward despite the stress, despite the uncertainty, despite all that, because I said, worst case scenario, I'm putting a positive message out into the world and I'm moving forward in a certain direction that I always wanted to when I was younger.
So in the end here, are you writing any additional books? Are you got any additional concepts on the table you want to share or anything you're thinking about next?
I do have 2 books that I've thought about. Writing a book for me is a very taxing endeavor. It's like and I'm glad people love the books is because I pour so much energy into them. Not gonna say what they are yet because I don't know if I'll ever put them out. What I'm doing
Right.
right now is I'm just expanding my YouTube channel for the most part because it's a free way for if people don't wanna buy my book, even though it's affordable, it's an easy way for people to access me. But other than that, I'm always like tinkering in the background, just playing with things and seeing like what am I inspired to move forward with? Because one thing I always want to do in my life, which currently I am, and I'm fortunate, is I can afford to only move forward on what I'm inspired to do, while all the other wheels that I've put in motion are just doing their thing.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm honored to have you on. We could definitely talk for another hour. I'm going to have you back and we'll continue to have these conversations because I think they're important with people right now. And you obviously understand that. And I appreciate that combo with you today. Folks, check out youtube.com/Andrew Cap. Go over to Amazon, check out his books, The Last Law of Attraction book you'll ever need to read. And 3 words he used or I used to sell 100,000 books. So go check those out again. 3 words I used to sell 100,000 books and the last law of attraction book you'll ever need to read on Amazon and check out any free content he's got on youtube.com/Andrew Cap. I think you guys will be inspired from it. I think you will find purpose in it. And I definitely think you'll understand how to attract more good things in your life. And Andrew, thanks again for coming on, man.
Neil, thank you so much for having me. If anyone wants an easy link to all that stuff, they can go to awesomemarvelous.com. And it was a true honor and pleasure to talk with you. This is not our first conversation. I've enjoyed every one, and I'm grateful for your insights and your expertise and you running the show.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.